Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Sutta study here at Empty Cloud Monastery. So today we'll be going through a short discourse from the Anguttara Nikaya, but first we'll start by paying homage to the Buddhas of past, present, and future. So please join your hands in Anjali, bringing up a mind of reverence for the Triple Gem. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ dhammāṃ saṅghāṃ namasāmi. So this morning we'll be looking at Anguttara Nikaya chapter 3, sutta number 32, which is one of the discourses that the Buddha gave directly to Ananda. As usual, I'll read through the text and give a bit of explanation here and there, and then I'll take any questions that you might have at the end. So the sutta begins. Then Venerable Ananda went to the Fortunate One, paid respects to him, sat to one side, and said to him, Bhante, is it possible for a monk to enter a kind of samadhi in which there would be no tendencies of self-identity, possessiveness, or conceit regarding this body with its consciousness, and towards all external objects? And one might reach and remain in that mental liberation, that wisdom liberation, in which there are no tendencies of self-identity, possessiveness, or conceit? Or to summarize that much more succinctly, Venerable Ananda is asking, is there a kind of samadhi which removes all of our self-identity and leads directly to full enlightenment? So is there a way of practicing samadhi which leads directly to enlightenment? And this is an important question because especially in relatively modern times, the last 100 years or so, there's been a strong anti-samadhi movement in Theravada Buddhism. So a movement of people saying that samadhi is not necessary, or even saying that samadhi is harmful, that's counterproductive. And that only insight meditation is necessary. You don't need to practice samadhi meditation. And this is one of the peculiarities of recent Buddhist movements, is this direct contradiction of the early texts, direct contradiction of themes that run throughout the Buddha's teachings. So the Buddha talks about samadhi all the time throughout the suttas, and the importance of developing samadhi and practicing jhanas and attaining deep states of concentration. And in a few places, he also talks about ways of practicing samadhi that lead directly to enlightenment. So this also is clearly indicating that samadhi is not necessarily separate from insight. It's not necessarily separate from the development of wisdom. But that there are ways of practicing samadhi which are simultaneous with practicing insight. That they don't need to be separate things. So Venerable Ananda is asking, is there some kind of samadhi which will eliminate one's self-centered ways of thinking and relating to the world, and which leads directly to liberation of mind? And the Pali for this, so what's translated as self-identity, possessiveness, and conceit, in Pali that's ahankara. Ahankara literally means making a sense of I. So ahang means I, such as I am speaking or I am reading. And kara means making or doing. So ahankara means making a sense of I, or doing the sense of I, the sense of self-identity. Then the next word in here is mamangkara. So mamang means mine, like that which belongs to me. Like this laptop is mine. This mouse pad is mine. So mamangkara means creating a sense of mine, something belonging to me. So this is possessiveness, the sense that we own things, we possess things. And possessiveness is based upon self-identity. So if there's no sense of me, then there can't be a sense of mine. So ahankara and mamangkara, ahankara is the sense me. Mamangkara is the sense of mine, that which belongs to me. And the third one is mana nusaya. So mana means conceit. And it's related to the word for concept. So it's the concept of self-identity, the concept of who we think we are. And often when we talk about conceit in Buddhism, we're talking about the three kinds of conceit: the conceit of superiority, the conceit of inferiority, and the conceit of equality. But there's also a more foundational kind of conceit, which is, in Pali, it's called asmi mana. So asmi literally means I am, or I exist. So asmi mana is the concept of self-existence. The concept I exist, I am. So this is the most foundational root form of self-identity. So often when we talk about self-identity, we're talking about what you might call specific self-identity, such as I am this body, I am this mind, I am these emotions, I am these preferences, I am these ideas, I am these opinions. Specific self-identity. And that kind of specific self-identity is what we call sakkaya ditthi. So the specific self-identity is the primary obstacle to stream entry, the first stage of awakening. And upon that reaching that first stage of awakening, then this coarse self-identity or specific self-identity falls away. But there remains non-specific self-identity or generalized self-identity. So the general belief in self-existence, that remains all the way until full enlightenment. So this is not eliminated until one becomes an arhat. There still remains this deep-rooted feeling, I exist as a separate individual. That still remains. So with stream entry, there drops away the specific details of who we think we are. So we recognize, okay, yeah, I'm not this chunk of meat. I'm not this anger or this desire. I'm not this opinion, or I'm not that perspective. Like, we recognize, like, these specific things are not who we are or what we are. But there's still this deep sense of, like, well, I definitely exist. I'm definitely here. I don't seem to be any of these particular impermanent, insubstantial sankharas. So I'm not any of them in particular, but I definitely exist as some kind of ongoing process. So the specifics of that process we can recognize are not who we are, but there's still the belief that there's some kind of ongoing self-process, and that must be who we are. So this is what we call asmi mana, the deepest, most fundamental form of self-concept. So self-concept might be a better translation for mana than conceit. So self-concept. So again, normally we have the self-concept of superiority. I am better than others. The self-concept of inferiority, I am worse than others. The self-concept of equality, I am equal to others. But all three of those are built upon the root self-concept of self-existence. I exist as an individual, as a separate being. And then the final word in this compound is anusaya. So anusaya we commonly translate as tendency or habit, the underlying tendency to behave or think or perceive in a particular way. So altogether the word compound is ahankara, mamankara, mana, anusaya. So this underlying tendency to relate to the world in terms of me and mine, this underlying tendency to constantly relate to the world based upon the belief in self-existence, the belief that we are some kind of ongoing, persistent, self-existent, separate individual. So Venerable Ananda is asking, is there some kind of samadhi we can do where this self-centered way of relating to the world falls away entirely, both towards our own body and mind, and also towards external objects? So he's also saying, like, well, maybe you can drop your sense of mind in relation to something outside yourself. Maybe you can drop it in terms of some specific details of body and mind. But is there a way of dropping it entirely in relationship to all things? So when he says this body with its consciousness and external objects, by this he's saying everything, everything whatsoever. So this is giving a complete picture. So there's our own body, mind, and then there's all external objects. So not having any kind of self-identity or self-concept in relationship to anything, either internal or external. And the Buddha replies, he replies, Ananda, it is possible for a monk to enter a kind of samadhi, and then he gives the same description that Venerable Ananda gives. He says, it is possible to enter this kind of samadhi. And Ananda asks, well, how? He says, Bhante, how could a monk enter this kind of samadhi? So how do you do it? And I find this also quite interesting because there's this implication here that Ananda is interested in samadhi practice, but that perhaps his wisdom is a little bit lacking. So one of the aspects of Venerable Ananda is that Venerable Ananda was considered the foremost expert in the suttas, the one who had the most thorough knowledge of all of the discourses that the Buddha gave. But he did not attain full enlightenment during the Buddha's lifetime. He did not attain full enlightenment until after the Buddha passed away. So while the Buddha was still alive, Venerable Ananda was able to attain stream entry, which again is still a very remarkable achievement, very substantial breakthrough. But even though he spent decades in the presence of the Buddha and had memorized all of the Buddha's teachings, he was not able to attain any higher stage of wisdom or insight. So one running theory on this is that Venerable Ananda's practice was very samadhi focused, but that he wasn't making much effort to develop deeper insight. So it then follows, it's actually quite natural then that Ananda would ask about a kind of samadhi which develops insight, which develops wisdom. Again, the implication being that he was practicing a kind of samadhi which was not deepening his wisdom. So what are the kinds of samadhi that do? And so the Buddha gives an answer as to a way of practicing this kind of samadhi. He says, Ananda, if it occurs to a monk This is peaceful, this is sublime, the stilling of all activities, the relinquishment of all acquisitions, the elimination of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. In this way, a monk can enter a kind of samadhi in which there would be no tendencies of self-identity, possessiveness, or conceit regarding this body with its consciousness and towards all external objects. And one might reach and remain in that mental liberation, that wisdom liberation, in which there are no tendencies of self-identity, possessiveness, or conceit. So here the Buddha, he gives a direct answer to Ananda's question. And he says it's by focusing on this particular phrase. So in Pali, this phrase goes, etang santang, etang panitang, yaridang sabba sankhara samato, sabbu patipati nissago, tanha kayo, virago, nirodo, nibbana. And this is one of these incredibly beautiful statements that we find in a number of suttas. One of these incredibly beautiful descriptions of the goal of Buddhist practice, but which also hints out the nature of Buddhist practice itself. So again, the Buddha is saying by focusing one's mind on this concept, it's possible to enter a samadhi which is liberating, a samadhi which produces enlightenment as its result, a samadhi which destroys self-identity, which destroys our normal self-centered perspectives. So I'd like to go through this phrase in a bit more detail because there's a lot of information packed into just a few words here. So again, it starts off etang santang. So santang means peace or peacefulness. So this is peaceful. Etang panitang. So panitang, it was translated here as sublime, which is one translation. Panita also has the meaning of delicious. So you might say like, oh, this food is very panita. Like this food is delicious. It's very deeply satisfying and enjoyable. So yeah, I mean sublime or excellent or delicious. So I kind of wish I had chosen delicious when I made this translation, but instead I picked sublime. So this is peaceful, this is delicious or sublime. That is sabba sankhara samata. So sabba means all, and sankhara, sankhara is one of these Pali words for which there is no suitable English translation. So sankhara in its most literal meaning is construct. So a sankhara is a construct. And it refers to any object whatsoever, whether physical or non-physical. Any object or activity whatsoever can be called a sankhara. So sankhara is sometimes translated very simply with the word thing. So sabba sankhara means all things. As long as we clarify that thing here doesn't only mean physical things, it also means ideas and perceptions and emotions and concepts and ideas and all manner of mental phenomena as well as physical phenomena. So in this translation, I had translated this as activities. So sabba sankhara is all activities, which in retrospect, I'm not quite happy with because that gives a little too narrow of a meaning to sankhara. So sankhara does include activities, but it also includes objects and ideas. Basically, every single discrete thing in all reality to which you could put a name. All of those things can be called sankharas. The only thing which is not a sankhara is nibbana. So the nibbana dhatu, the element of the unconditioned. And properly speaking, you can't even call that a thing. Can't really call it much of anything at all except for the unconditioned. That which cannot be defined in terms of any condition. that which cannot be defined in terms of any characteristic, that which cannot be defined in terms of existence or non-existence, that which cannot be defined in any way whatsoever, in fact, that to which definitions and ideas cannot stick. So this is the unconditioned, the nibbana dhatu. Everything else is a sankhara. And then finally, the third word in this compound is samatha. So samatha means tranquility or peacefulness or serenity. It's actually from the same root as the word santa. So santa means peace. Samatha means peacefulness. So it has a very similar meaning. So sabba sankhara samatha means the pacification or tranquilizing of all objects, activities, and things. So again, it was translated here as the stilling of all activities. And that's one way of understanding this term, sabba sankhara samatha. Can also mean, again, pacification of all things. So bringing all things to a state of peace. That would be another way of relating to this. If we take sankhara in its more limited and specific sense of mental activities, then sabba sankhara samatha means bringing all of your mental activity to a state of peace, to a state of stillness, to a state of serenity. Then the next element in this phrase is sabbu padipatinisaggo. So sabba, again, means all. Upadi is commonly translated as acquisition. I've come across a number of other rather peculiar translations. I've seen upadi translated as paraphernalia, which I find mildly amusing but not particularly helpful. I've seen it translated as substratum of existence, which also is amusing, but perhaps excessively overly specific, perhaps. Maybe a little too complex to the point where it starts to obscure the intended meaning of the word. So the word upadi itself literally means holding close. So upa means close and di means to hold. So upadi is that which you hold close, that which you hold dear, that which you don't want to let go of. So that which we try to hold on to. So, and then patinisagga means relinquishment. So sabba upadi, so all acquisitions, all possessions, everything that we try to hold on to. Patinisagga, relinquishing those things, letting go of them. So what is it that we hold on to? What is it that we like to keep close to us and not let go of? Well, that's a question that each one of us needs to ask ourselves. What is it that we're not willing to let go of? Often it's physical things, of course. And we have our cherished physical possessions, our favorite teapot, our iPad, meditation cushion that's just the right thickness and softness. We all have our particular things that we possess that we really don't like to be far away from. We like to keep them close. But on a more subtle level, it's looking at our mind. What are the attitudes and ideas and opinions that we like to keep close, that we don't like to be separated from or apart from? What are the emotions? What are the self-identities? How do we usually like to think of ourselves? If you like to think of yourself as being smart or clever or funny, well, that's an upadi. That's something that you hold dear, something that you want to keep close to you, something that you don't want to let go of. Or if you think of yourself in any way whatsoever. So any kind of adjective that you might put to yourself, well, that's just a concept that you're holding tightly to. So sabbupatipattinissaga means the relinquishment of everything that we hold dear, the relinquishment of everything that we try to keep close to us. So again, that includes all physical possessions, but also it includes every single mental phenomenon, every single mental object or idea or activity that we don't want to be separated from, we don't want to be apart from. Then the next item here, tanha kayo. So tanha, we know is craving. So this fundamental cause of all suffering. And kaya means elimination, destruction. So tanha kaya means the elimination of craving, the destruction of all craving. Viraga, this word is actually an incredibly simple word, but which gets mistreated somewhat. So raga means lust or passion, and vi means without or separated from. So viraga quite literally means to be free of lust, to be to lack passion, to be free of lust and passion. So viraga quite simply just means dispassion. But for reasons which escape me, it's often translated as fading away. But as I've gone through the suttas, I haven't found anywhere in the suttas where viraga can't be translated simply as dispassion. I haven't found anywhere in the suttas where viraga means fading away. I've only found places where it means dispassion. So I'm quite skeptical about the translating viraga as fading, when again, in every place I've seen, it simply means dispassion. So viraga means, again, dispassion, freedom from passion, the mind which lacks lust for anything whatsoever. Nirodha, the next word in this sentence, nirodha is commonly translated as cessation. Cessation of what? Well, the most simple sense, it's the cessation of defilement and delusion, the cessation of greed, hatred, and delusion. That's the simplest way of talking about nirodha. You can also talk about it as the cessation of self-identity. So the coming to an end of this constant activity of projecting a sense of self onto things. I don't remember who it is off the top of my head, but there's one monk who likes to use the verb selfing in the sense that we're constantly generating a sense of self. So it's not that self is something which has some persistent ongoing existence, but rather it's something that we're constantly creating. So in every moment we create a sense of self. So it's actually quite easy to relinquish self-identity, just stop creating it. And it ceases on its own. It actually ceases every moment anyway. It's just that we also constantly create it every moment. So we miss out on the cessation of self-identity because we're so focused on maintaining our habit of creating a self-identity in each moment, constantly finding something to label as me or mine. And nirodha can also, on a deeper level, mean the cessation of sankharas, the cessation of the appearance of separate, distinct objects. So with the relinquishment of all activities, involvements, and engagements, then one can come to a direct perception of the cessation of all phenomena. So this, again, this is one of the ways that we talk about silent illumination meditation. So this incredibly profound style of meditation that's particularly popular in Chan Buddhism, so in the schools of Chinese Zen, but which also is found to some degree in the Theravada tradition. So there's many Theravada teachers who teach a similar style of meditation under various names. Calling it objectless concentration, which in Pali is animitta samadhi, or I think Ajahn Sumedho calls it choiceless awareness. So there's different terms that people use to refer to this style of practice, where one constantly relinquishes all sankharas. One is constantly putting down the perception of separate objects, letting go of all things, ceasing all deliberate activity. And by doing so, one is able to start to become aware of that which has no sankharas, that which has no activities, that which has no separate objects. And that, of course, is the unconditioned, nibbana, which is the final item in this phrase. So everything in this phrase is all adjectives that are synonyms of the same thing. And that same thing that they're all synonyms of is nibbana. So nibbana is, once again, it's the element of the unconditioned. In Pali, that's asankhata dhatu. So the element of the unconditioned, that aspect of reality which is not conditional, which cannot be described in terms of characteristics, in terms of conditions, in terms of objects. And it is the direct, full realization of nibbana, which is itself synonymous with enlightenment, synonymous with awakening. So a partial awareness of nibbana, a partial awareness of the unconditioned, can be sufficient to help one abandon Sakaya Ditti, so this course-specific self-identity. So a partial awareness of the unconditioned can lead to stream entry, if it's sufficiently deep and profound. You can also get little glimpses of it that aren't strong enough to cause a breakthrough to stream entry. And this is actually quite common, particularly with certain kinds of meditation practice. It's quite common to have fragmentary glimpses of the unconditioned, which are quite enticing and very peaceful and very pleasant, but which are not sufficiently strong and deep enough to shatter self-identity, and are not sufficiently strong enough to bring about stream entry. They're still valuable in that they give us some encouragement on the path. They give us a sense that we're going in the right general direction. They give us a sense that what we're doing is beneficial and that it's helpful. But it's always important to be clear about the distinction between an interesting meditation experience and an actual irreversible breakthrough of wisdom. And the way the Buddha gives to distinguish the two is by examining how one thinks, feels, and acts afterwards. So you can gauge the depth of one's awakening by how one behaves, not necessarily by the nature of some special experience during meditation, but rather by how you act afterwards. Has there been some permanent shift in your thinking and behavior, which is in line with the behavior of enlightened beings? So there's a few places where the Buddha talks about this. The one which I tend to refer to the most often is the Kosambi Sutta, or Kosambhya Sutta, where the Buddha gives, I think, seven characteristics of a stream enterer. And it's all talking about their behavior after stream entry. None of it has anything whatsoever to do with the actual experience of stream entry itself. It's all about how they behave afterwards. So again, it is possible to get these fragmentary glimpses of the unconditioned. And actually, if you practice silent illumination meditation with sincerity, you can get these fragmentary glimpses relatively quickly, relatively soon. But that alone is not sufficient for stream entry. There must be a much deeper and more complete recognition that what we think of as me and mine is completely insubstantial, impermanent, has no substance to it whatsoever. That can lead to the relinquishment of core self-identity. And then recognizing that all things entirely, without exception, are insubstantial and have the nature of cessation. That can lead to full awakening. And this is what the Buddha is talking about here. When he talks about tranquilizing all sankharas, so bringing peacefulness and serenity to all mental activities, as well as the relinquishment of all objects. He means everything. Absolutely everything. And this is where things get very interesting once again. So a very valuable meditation mantra, which I learned many, many years ago. Ask yourself, what is it that I am not willing to let go of? And you can rephrase it to your particular liking. But the point is to continually examine, what is it that I am not willing to let go of? And you can feel it. So some things you let go and you're like, okay, that was easy. Yeah, I definitely wasn't holding tightly to that one. But then you look more closely and you're like, oh, but this, oh, really don't want to let go of this one. And the more deeply you look at your mind, the more you start to run into ideas or perceptions or emotions or concepts or ways of relating to the world, worldviews, beliefs, self-identities. We start to run into especially mental constructs, which we just cannot bear to let go of. We're like, oh, but if I let go of that, oh, that'd be such a shame. Oh, that'd be terrible. What would life be without that opinion? And the answer is, it would be one step closer to enlightenment. But it sure doesn't feel that way when we run across our deeply cherished mental constructs. It's like, oh, but this is such a part of who I am. It's like, well, yeah, and you're suffering and delusional. So maybe letting go of part of who you are is a good thing. Letting go of part of your suffering, that's all. It also brings to mind one of my favorite quotes from the Pali Suttas, to steal a line from Ayya Palanyani, one of my 84,000 favorite sutta quotes. The Buddha says in the Kachanagota Sutta, he says, it's only dukkha that arises and dukkha that ceases. In other words, whatever we're holding tight to, we're just holding tightly to dukkha. Whatever we're not willing to let go of, it's just dukkha that we're not willing to let go of. It's nothing precious, it's nothing valuable, it's nothing important, it's just dukkha that we're clinging to, that's all. Maybe it's time to let go of it. So fundamentally, what the Buddha is talking about here, one way of relating to this is he's talking about the perception of nibbana, the perception of the unconditioned. That's a very direct way of talking about it. You can also say he's talking about the perception of emptiness. That would also be an accurate way of describing naming the meditation technique that he's describing here. You could also, again, say that he's talking about silent illumination practice. So animitta samadhi, this objectless concentration, which is a simultaneous samatha vipassana method, a method for simultaneously developing both samadhi and wisdom. And these are all accurate ways of talking about it, as long as we recognize the characteristics. So he's talking about a kind of samadhi. So what is samadhi? Samadhi is mental unification and stability. So it's when the mind is completely unified and steady. So this is a state in which the mind is not moving around. And it's also a state which is leading towards the relinquishment of all sankharas, the relinquishment of all things, and most specifically, the relinquishment of self-identity. So this is not a dull and dead samadhi state. This is a samadhi state which is focused on the relinquishment of all things. So there must be the sharpness and clarity of mind to know things, coupled with the deep commitment to non-attachment, the deep commitment to relinquishment, which knows things and discards them immediately, which knows things but is not holding on to any of them. So it calls to mind one of the great Ajahn Chah quotes. So Ajahn Chah, he once said, he said, our practice is very simple. It's just knowing and letting go. And actually, I would take that one step farther, and I would say that knowing and letting go are not separate things. I would say that it's a single activity. So knowing, letting go is a single activity of mind. It's not two separate activities. So it's the knowing which is letting go, and it's the letting go which is knowing. So these inseparable activities of knowing and letting go. And again, this is done in a state of complete stillness and collectedness of mind. The stillness and collectedness of mind, which allows all phenomena to fall away. And to help give a little more clarification, the Buddha also added on a short poem at the end. So he refers to another section of the Pali Canon. So he refers here to part of the Sutta Nipata. He says, Ananda, this is what I was referring to in response to Punaka's questions in the Parayana. Again, that's a section of the Sutta Nipata. When I said, having evaluated the entire world, they are not disturbed by anything in it. Peaceful, serene, untroubled, unwanting, they have transcended birth and decay. So this beautiful little statement of the mind of an awakened being. So the mind of an awakened being is fully aware of the whole world. So it's grasped the entire world. It fully understands the whole world, but it's not disturbed by anything in the world. So nothing whatsoever in the world is capable of disturbing the mind of an awakened being. And why is that? Well, first off, it's because there's no self-identity which can be thrown off balance by anything. How are we thrown off balance by the things of the world? It's because we create a target. The bigger your self-identity is, the more surface there is for dukkha to land. There's more opportunity there is for you to identify as something which is painful, for you to react to something. If there's no self-identity, then all the phenomena of the world will flow by without sticking. There's no surface for it to land on. There's no target for it to hit. And so then this is why the Buddha says such a being is peaceful, serene, untroubled. So they're not bothered by anything in the world. They recognize that all things are simply arising and ceasing. All things are insignificant. There's not any importance to any of it. The play of objects in samsara is meaningless. There's no point in getting wrapped up in any of it. And he also says that such a being is, in Pali, niraso, which I find slightly disturbing because my name is Suddhāso. So it's actually from the same word. Aso means one's aspiration or one's wish, one's goals. So Suddhāso means one whose aspirations and goals are pure. But an enlightened being is not Suddhāso. An enlightened being is niraso. They have no wishes, goals, hopes whatsoever. Because what would you wish for? You would just be wishing for some piece of samsara. And when one has already evaluated all of samsara, then one recognizes that nothing whatsoever is worth holding on to. Nothing in all samsara is worth holding on to. So why would you wish for any of it? Why would you aspire towards anything in samsara? None of it is worth having or experiencing. And the Buddha says such a person has transcended birth and decay. So jati and jara. So they're no longer subject to birth. So they're free from the cycle of rebirth. And they're also free from decay, because everything that comes into being decays. It falls into decrepitude. It falls into diminution. It's subject to catastrophic change. So when one doesn't identify as anything whatsoever, then one is free from decay. One is free from the cycle of birth and death. One is free from suffering. So that's the end of this sutta. So at this time, I'll go ahead and take any questions that you might have. First one, Anita asks, can you please repeat the Pali for conceit again? The Pali is simply mana. So M long A N A, so mana. So very simple 4-letter word. If you want the full phrase, look up the Pali text for this. So the Pali text is, again, the full phrase is ahankara, mamankara, mana nusaya. Altogether, that means I-making, mind-making, so mind-making, possessiveness, and the tendency towards self-concept, towards self-conceit. The next question. And Buddharuchi says, I'm glad I've never heard of the anti-samadhi you speak of. I'm surprised you haven't heard of it. It's depressingly common in the Buddhist world. It says, perhaps depopularization of insight meditation overshadows samadhi. Yeah, that's actually what happened. So it comes from the idea that enlightenment is a function of insight, which is true, it is. But then that led to the belief that therefore you only need insight and you don't need anything else. But what that's missing out on is the fact that the Buddha spoke over and over and over again all throughout the suttas about the importance of samadhi for having strong insight. That without strong samadhi, you cannot have strong insight. So it's a necessary condition. Then Anita asks, would viraga also be disenchantment? If not, how would it be different? So the word commonly translated as disenchantment is nibbida, which is a different word. And it's in the suttas, it's commonly given as a sequence. Nibbindang virajati viragam vimuchati. So another one of my 84,000 favorite sutta quotes, this simple 4-word phrase. Nibbindang virajati means disenchantment produces dispassion. Viraga vimuchati, dispassion produces liberation. Or if we want to verb some words here, disenchantment dispassions, dispassion liberates. It's a very simple statement. So simple linguistically, but actually a profoundly deep statement. So the first word, nibbida, commonly translated as disenchantment. I've seen some other translations, but I still lean towards disenchantment as perhaps the best English word for this. It's when you start to lose interest in the things of the world. You stop trying to find happiness in the things of the world because you started to recognize that there is no happiness to be found in them. And actually the literal meaning of the word nibbida or nibbindati, it literally means to stop searching. You've put down the search. So normally we go through our lives searching for pleasure. But at some point, if you're practicing Buddhism well, at some point you'll start to realize that all pleasure is temporary and unsatisfying. And when that lesson really starts to hit home, then what arises is disenchantment. The realization that there's no point in seeking out ordinary pleasure. So we stop trying. And instead we turn our attention towards spiritual practice. So that's nibbida, disenchantment. And what follows from disenchantment then is that our passion for samsaric enjoyment starts to fade away. We start to lose our our delight and interest and lust in ordinary worldly pleasures, ordinary worldly activities. And that's dispassion. Dispassion is when one's lust is dissipated. One's passion for samsara has disappeared. And that is the immediate precondition for enlightenment. So viraga vimucchati. So dispassion liberates. So if you want a complete summary of Buddhist practice, there's 4 words. Nibbindang virajati viraga vimucchati. Disenchantment produces dispassion, dispassion liberates. Then Hayden asks, is the Buddha describing a unique type of samadhi here? Or is it that all strong samadhi has these features and the Buddha is encouraging us to contemplate how sublime these features of samadhi are? There are different kinds of samadhi. So not all samadhi states have this characteristic. There are samadhi states which do not contain any wisdom component. So those are the samadhi states which lead to rebirth as Brahma Devas, or even to rebirth in the arupa domains, the non-physical domains. Those are forms of samadhi which are in fact just a deadness of mind, a mind which is very peaceful and very still, but which is not relinquishing acquisitions, is not abandoning sankharas, is not letting go of self-identity. So the kind of samadhi the Buddha is talking about here is a samadhi which is focused upon the relinquishment of all things. So this is not all samadhi states. So there is pure samadhi, which is just stillness of mind. And there is simultaneous samadhi and vipassana. So the simultaneous cultivation of samadhi and wisdom. And the kind that he's talking about here is when you're practicing samadhi focused on the relinquishment of all sankharas, letting go of all things, including all self-identity. So again, the modern form of Buddhist practice, which most closely matches this, is silent illumination practice. So it's a samadhi practice which is focused on letting go of all things. And which is, in the Buddhist texts, in the oldest strain of the Pali Suttas, it's called Animitta Samadhi. So one is letting go of all things, relinquishing all things. Then Anita asks, would you say Nirodha ultimately leads to understanding and experiencing emptiness? Yeah, you can say that. Yeah. Though if one focuses only on Nirodha, then that leads to a one-sided view of reality, where one can get caught in the perception of non-existence. So this is one of the things the Buddha warns against in the Kaccanagotta Sutta, is if you focus entirely on the cessation of things, then you'll get stuck in the perception of non-existence. You'll get stuck in the belief that nothing exists. But that's not quite correct. Whereas if you focus only on the manifestation of things, the arising of things, the apparent existence of things, then you'll get caught in the perception that things are absolutely, genuinely real and solid. And that's also not correct. So most people are more caught in the perception of existence. So for most people, focusing on cessation will help them move in the right direction. But it's quite possible to overshoot the mark and wind up fixating on non-existence. And that isn't enlightenment, and it's not understanding emptiness. It's just getting caught in another delusion. So there's the delusion that things exist, and there's the delusion that nothing exists. Both are incorrect. And Piyal and Indira ask, Does it mean that cessation comes in small installments, or does it happen all at once? Well, again, it means it depends on what kind of cessation you're talking about. But yeah, for most people, it comes in small installments. So you're letting go a little bit, letting go a little bit, letting go a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And as time goes by and you let go more and more and more, then you start to become more and more fully aware of the unconditioned. Start to become more clearly aware of the Nibbana Dhatu, which permeates and saturates all phenomena. Then Deborah asks, would you agree that emptiness is empty of a separate self, as Thich Nhat Hanh relates in his talks? Yeah, that's actually one of the classic ways of talking about emptiness. And it is useful, but it's also sometimes that phrase is used as a weapon to try to refute the idea that phenomena are also empty of inherent existence. So sometimes that leads to this wrong idea that things actually are genuinely real. They just don't belong to anyone. But that also is a misunderstanding, which again, there's countless Pali Suttas where the Buddha clearly rejects the idea that any phenomenon is real in and of itself. Where he rejects the idea that any phenomenon is substantial or solid or stable in and of itself. So empty of a separate self, it needs to be understood, applies to all things. So nothing can be described as self-existent. Nothing can be described as having a real, persistent existence of its own. Then, and Edith asks, if Ananda was only a Sotapanna, a stream enterer, doesn't that mean he could only understand the Buddha's teachings to a certain degree? Yeah, that's technically true. Technically, we don't fully understand the Buddha's teachings until we become fully enlightened. Up until then, our understanding is always going to be a little bit distorted. So that's technically true. Then Edith also asks, which path is the quickest in your opinion? Samatha and Vipassana together, or Vipassana, which still needs Samadhi, or Samatha first and then Vipassana? I think it depends on the person. So different people have different needs and they'll benefit from different strategies. So in my own experience, I've had the most success with starting with Samadhi. But I know other people who they've had success starting with Vipassana and then developing Samadhi later on. And I know some, not very common, but some people who can jump directly into conjoined Samatha Vipassana practice and get good results from that. Not so much. I find normally Samatha Vipassana practice, it's too subtle for beginners. Usually somebody needs to already have a fair amount of experience before they can practice conjoined Samatha Vipassana with any real success. But some people do seem to have a knack for it and they pick it up quickly and easily. So yeah, my answer is that you can't really say that any of these paths are the quickest, rather that it depends upon a person's particular needs. And that can also change over the course of your practice. So it's important to be flexible to the shifting conditions of our practice. And Buddharuchi asks, can we say, as I feel, that pure insight is to be found in Samadhi? In Samadhi, we experience wisdom. I don't quite understand what you're asking here. Pure insight is to be found in Samadhi. I mean, it can be. Again, the Buddha said, samahitang chittang yathabhutang jnanadasanang. So the mind that is in samadhi knows and sees things as they really are. But again, you can be in samadhi without any wisdom as well. So samadhi does not necessarily produce wisdom. But without samadhi, you cannot have deep wisdom. So samadhi is a necessary component for wisdom. But samadhi does not necessarily produce wisdom. Dan asks, is there any benefit to wondering after a deep experience? What was that? Glimpse of nibbana? Was that jhana? Or is this just active defiled mind again? A certain amount of review and contemplation after meditation can be useful. Just be careful that you're not just wasting your time and creating more mental constructs. What's more useful, rather than trying to label your experience afterwards, what's more useful is to ask yourself, what did I do that worked? And how can I continue building on that? What did I do that didn't work? And how can I avoid making those similar mistakes again? That's more useful, rather than trying to label like, was that first jhana? Was that second jhana? Maybe it wasn't jhana at all. Well, that's not so useful. Sometimes it's worth talking to an experienced teacher about your experiences and seeing what they have to say. But ultimately what we're doing is, and as Ajahn Chah said, we're just knowing and letting go. And that's all we're really trying to do here. And samadhi is very useful for both sides of that. In fact, it's necessary for both sides of that. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is to let go of all sankharas, not to build up new sankharas. And Anita asks, what is the middle of cessation and existence? Seeing things as they are and the knowing of both. Would equanimity be the practice? If you really want to know what the middle of cessation and existence is, there's a book I can recommend. It's called The Buddhist Teaching of Totality by Professor Chung. It's a really wonderful book, relatively dense, and I keep recommending this book to people and people keep not reading it or they can't get through the first chapter. Nonetheless, I keep recommending it because this was a book which, for me, it really, really helped me understand what emptiness is and what is in the middle between existence and non-existence. What is the simultaneous non-obstruction of emptiness and form? What the heck do we mean by statements like that? This book, The Buddhist Teaching of Totality, really helped to clarify these concepts for me. And then that directly fed back into my meditation practice and really helped to clarify my meditation practice quite a bit. So if you really want to know, I recommend that book, The Buddhist Teaching of Totality by Professor Chung. PL and Indira ask, in Anapanasati is the second tetrad, pleasure and bliss, etc., equivalent to jhana? In my opinion, not necessarily. So it's quite possible to experience a certain amount of piti and sukha, which are not first jhana. In fact, as one is progressing towards first jhana, piti and sukha will start to arise and build. But when you actually enter first jhana, then piti and sukha are incredibly powerful. Like you will feel the absolute best you've ever felt in your entire life. It's really unmistakable. But in the process of building up your samadhi as you're moving towards jhana, then the piti and sukha also will build. So a certain amount of piti sukha is normal in what the commentaries call upachara samadhi. So upachara literally means going close. So upachara samadhi is when your samadhi is getting closer to jhana. So as your samadhi is building and you're moving towards jhana, then your piti and sukha will also build. So that sense of euphoric pleasure in the body will grow as your samadhi grows. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're in jhana. But it's usually an indication that you're going in the right direction. Oh, wait. There we go. Bobby asks, how can I reconcile speech when it leads to not only personal delusion, but others' delusions? Should I avoid speech unless absolutely necessary? It's a little off topic, but I'll answer anyway. Yeah, you probably should avoid speech unless absolutely necessary. That's often a good strategy. When in doubt, don't say anything at all. But also try to, as the Buddha said, try to speak words that are beneficial and worth treasuring. So we do need to learn right speech. It's not enough just to avoid speech altogether. We also need to learn how to speak useful words, beneficial words, kind words, gentle words at the right time, in the right way. And that's quite challenging. Silence is much easier than right speech. But we need to learn right speech. This is part of the Noble Eightfold Path. If right speech just meant not talking, then the Buddha would have defined right speech as not talking, but that isn't how he defined it. He defined it as speaking words that are true, beneficial, gentle, lovable, at the right time, at the right place, worth treasuring, and so on. So we really do need to learn how to use speech correctly in a way that supports our own practice as well as the people around us. And it's not easy. It really isn't. But the practice of attaining awakening is not easy. Otherwise, the world would be crowded with Buddhas by now. So of course this is difficult, but it's worth doing. And it looks like that's the last question. So I think we'll go ahead and end there for the morning. So please bring your hands together in Anjali, and we can say sadhu 3 times. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.